Hello, good morning. Welcome to Interchange. It seems completely impossible. It's been another year since the last time we were here, but there we go. Here we are. I've only got a few minutes today to set the scene, so I'm going to get straight to it. I was chatting to Paul and Andrew and others the other day about what I would actually cover off in terms of this particular piece of just opening up the conference for today. And I could open with a long list of challenges and crisis points and analysis of the last 2 hours of the news or the last 72 hours of the news cycle and all the rest of it, and all these unexpected, complicated, big twists and turns around which we have no control. But I thought that might not be very helpful. So instead, I actually want to use these few minutes to kind of try to just lift us up a bit. I'm going to take a few minutes to be really positive about some of the things that I think have gone really right, or at least are heading in the right direction, since the last time we all met at Interchange this time last year. So my working title is 5 Reasons to be Cheerful When All Around Us in the World Feels a Bit Mad. Okay, so there's only 5, you can count with me, I promise it won't take very long. So reason to be cheerful, number 1. Genuinely, we have a government that spent the past year sending us all some seriously positive messages and signals on the importance of infrastructure, not just transport, not just energy, not just digital, etc., but across the range in terms of infrastructure and its importance to the UK, to its growth, and essentially to UK PLC and its onward future. Now, I know there's going to be loads of different opinions in the room in terms of specific projects and what we want to see and what we don't want to see and so on. But actually, I think we can all get on the same side here with the bigger point. Because if we look around the world, we should definitely not take that position for granted. And I think things have changed in the last 12 months, which is great. So compared with this time last year, I think I stood here last year, and I think I talked about how every policy and strategy in the land was being rewritten, right? And a lot of them hadn't come out yet. So we've now got many, many more published plans and strategies. We've got a 10-year plan, we've got an industrial strategy, we've got more certainty in terms of government spend across many departments and sectors. We've got a new and a refreshed, and a soon-to-be refreshed again, actually, infrastructure pipeline. You can ask questions about whether or not that's going to be sufficient. And I suspect we might all agree that the answer is probably not. But in terms of reasons to be cheerful, the fact that all this now exists and is kind of locked in and moving has to be a positive sign of real progress and change and effort in terms of the spaces that we're all interested in. So for transport, we've got key rail upgrades, we've got obvious movement on airport investment, we've got bus reform shifts going on, we've got clarity around some really important shifts actually in terms of strategic roads investment, plans for EV infrastructure, local level, we've got more commitment over a longer window now in terms of active travel. Plenty of reasons to be cheerful. So, reason to be cheerful, number 2. Again, over the past year, I think we've seen a much more consistent and modern and positive, clear messaging, again from government, on transport, specifically now transport and its value to society. We're doing a lot better, I think, at talking about the why for transport investment, the purpose of the system, not just as a kind of a physical connector of people and stuff, but actually about its abilities to create good outcomes. So an enabler of growth, a creator of health, a builder of inclusive networks and so on. And also we've seen an update in terms of the government narrative, and this is coming through from Heidi and the senior team at DFT and beyond. We've seen a real update in terms of the role of data, the digital connectivity narrative, and how that fits together with transport instead of treating it as something that we're kind of eyeing up suspiciously and not quite sure what to say about it. And I think that's really positive. Now, I know that's really obvious to all of us in the room because it's what we do. But I think we were forgetting this time a year ago that very often that message was not at all clear. It was not being said. We were diving into the detail without setting the scene, and it meant that it was very difficult for transport as a sector to find its place in terms of some of those bigger conversations. So I think it's great to see over the past year, and actually I was looking back when I was putting my notes together for today, it is really obvious that there is a drumbeat in terms of making sure that that message lands. And some of you will remember that this time a year ago, I stood here talking about how a small group of us, many of us are here today, were helping to advise the Secretary of State and also the senior team at DFT in terms of the run-up to the capital review, the spending review, that kind of thing. And this was one of the key things that we were saying, look, it would just make such a difference if we got better at explaining our narrative and our story and why this matters. So we're seeing this spreading out in other areas as well. So MHCLG, the new local outcomes framework, it's literally what it says on the tin. It's literally what it says on the tin. So if we get that right, we will have a focus at local level as well as national level that should be really, really helpful. That's not just about transport, but it covers all the bases, and it absolutely takes in the transport side of things. And I think it's a fairly safe bet, although, of course, not quite out yet. But when we see the integrated national transport strategy emerge, it will probably also follow this trend. Reason to be cheerful, number 3. And here we come to climate action. And of course we do, because it's me, and I'm afraid you're not going to escape from that one ever in terms of things that I want to talk about. So my reason to be cheerful, it's kind of two here actually. My reason to be cheerful in terms of climate action over the course of the last year is that in a technical sense, on decarbonisation, so the attack strategy for climate action, I think we're seeing massive shifts in terms of things that will carry us in both the right direction and at a faster pace. Now, okay, just take a pause from the cheerful bit for a moment. We all know that climate action has also become a bit of a political football over the last 12 months. And there's no point pretending that hasn't happened. However, what really encourages me, genuinely, is to see how closely embedded the decarb pieces are into almost everything that all of us are doing. And that was not the case 5 years ago, 3 years ago. It was beginning to be the case, in the last handful of years, but it's really started to take up steam now, which is brilliant. So in terms of the direction of decarbonisation and some technical actions, there are all sorts of things going on. So obviously the DFT a few years ago essentially mandated the use of PAS 2080 to do with carbon management across infrastructure and now buildings as well. That has now triggered all sorts of change. Supply chain changes, skills type changes, overhaul of key data needs. There are all sorts of parallels going on in the wider building space as well. And you put all of that together, it's spreading into water, it's spreading into energy, it's spreading into digital. It is a very, very rare major project now that does not have a focus on some sort of element to do with carbon management. And you can see it coming through in the NISTA commitment side of things in terms of the NSIPs that are being tracked. You can see all that kind of thing happening, but you're also seeing it at the much smaller scale as well. And that, to me, is really exciting, because that means this is change we can actually control. I think you can even add into that as well the pieces to do with longer standing, I guess, changes paths we've been on, things to do with social value, the fact that there's no government money spent without consideration of social value, and the climate piece has always been in there, but suddenly it's beginning to actually mean something, and we're seeing the same in terms of nature restoration as well. Obvious benefits for decarb in that as well. We're seeing all sorts of changes coming through from DEFRA now, a huge long list of requirements coming through, some of which are actually quite complicated and complex and confusing, but it's all actually happening. And when DESNES did a review, probably about 6-8 months ago now, of all the various policies, bits of movement, commitments being made across government in terms of where we're going on the movement towards net zero through decarbonisation, there were hundreds of different things that are embedded. That actually isn't going anywhere, and that's really exciting in terms of the direction of change. But in terms of the pace of change, that's a different thing. Obviously, we can go in the right direction, we can go too slowly. We also need to get a bit faster at what we're doing. We all know we're going too slowly. And I think actually there is also a reason to be cheerful here, because I think that message is beginning to land. Some of you have probably heard me talk before, and these are not my words. I'm taking things from the UN, from our UK Climate Change Committee, from all sorts of chief scientific advisors across our government departments, that kind of thing. In case you haven't heard it said really, really clearly, if we get on with net zero by 2050, the size of the task basically is to take 500 billion tonnes of carbon out of the atmosphere. If we delay by 10 years, so if we go more slowly towards that same outcome, the size of the task basically doubles. 900 billion tonnes, that's a global figure. So it makes it far more expensive. So all this talk about how net zero is too expensive and so on, actually we need to just stand back and we need to bring our professional judgment into play here, I think, and help to make the bigger point that not acting is not really actually an option, because it will get much more costly and much more risky. So I think there's a huge reason to be cheerful there. And the final piece of that one is around China, perhaps bizarrely. The last 2 years in terms of the Chinese economy, very much built on economic growth, right? And I know it's a totally different political system. I know it's far away. I know it's very different to the systems around here. But if we want to look at that clearly, they have seen enormous shifts from a really rapidly growing economy with huge carbon emissions that were rising just as fast. They've had 2 years where the carbon emissions have basically now flatlined. There's 43% growth year on year in terms of solar. There's 14% growth in wind year on year, nuclear 8%. Nearly half of the new vehicle sales in China are now EVs. There is a huge shift underway, and that's nothing to do with our politics. Obviously, it's all to do with their system and so on, but we know that's built on the economic side of things. If that sort of scale of economy can do it, then why on earth are we sitting here worrying about whether or not it makes sense to do it here? It just doesn't make any sense. So I think it would obviously go faster if the policies were better aligned with all this technical action and so on, but actually there's a heap of reasons to be cheerful in there. So that brings me on to reason to be cheerful number 4. We're nearly there, I promise. And this one is to do with the defensive side of climate action, because again, I think there's good news here. I genuinely think the past year we finally, in the UK, actually got the memo, not just in terms of talking about it, but in terms of starting to do stuff to do with building in some resilience-led, risk-led thinking in terms of climate change that we know we're going to see, and really started to take that a bit more seriously in terms of what does it mean in terms of local areas, in terms of regions, in terms of the country, and so on. And again, it's obvious, to me at least, this is not an optional activity, but you look at what NISTA is up to, you look at what the DFT is up to in terms of the new climate adaptation strategy, the movement on the Structures Fund, the Royal Academy of Engineering's recognition of the fact that ageing infrastructure plus climate change equals major problem. There's technical recognition. Loads of our standards are being updated to take account of the fact that the conditions of the future will not be the same as the conditions of the past, and actually the pace of that change could well be faster than we imagine. There's a new PAS coming on climate adaptation pathways. There is so much change in this space in the last 12 months. I genuinely think this is all stuff that we can actually control, and I think it's genuinely a whole heap of reasons to really be genuinely cheerful. So finally, and I've got 2 minutes, I'm doing well. Finally, reason number 5 to be cheerful. And this one's just a dead obvious one. You're here. You're here, we've done it again. So yes, it is a completely mad world out there, but for the next 2 days, we've actually got time to connect and think and join up ideas and try to figure out how we, as a group, can actually do more to take control across all of these different areas where we could actually, get things a lot more right, essentially, if that makes sense. Now, I'm well aware that I'm standing between all of you in a very rare assembly of mayors, so I'm going to stop in a second, but I would just close, I guess, by saying, I feel it's a choice to be positive. I feel it's a choice to find ways to look for things we can control and actually do something about it. And I think even if those things feel really, really small against a backdrop of slight craziness and madness, it's still actually the right thing to do. So I would like to wish you all a brilliant couple of days. I'd like to, I hope you'll take the chance to listen, to learn, to network, to think, as I say, and perhaps find your own reasons to be cheerful. Thank you very much.